Good afternoon, and welcome to Smithsonian Gardens' weekly webinar series, Let's Talk Gardens. It is that time of the year that we're thinking about what we're going to add to our gardens. It's been delightfully rainy today, a perfect day if you have something to put in the ground so you don't have to water afterwards. But we're delighted to host a special guest today, Andrew Bunting, the Vice President of Public Horticulture for the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. He's going to answer or give us information on magnolias that will help you out and help you consider which magnolias are best for your gardens. As always, please put your questions in the chat box and we'll answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. You will notice that Sarah's putting the handout in the chat box. She's breaking it up into sections, so you'll be able to see what plants, the scientific name of the hydrangeas that Andrew is going to refer to. Thank you for joining us today. And Andrew, thank you for joining us today. We greatly appreciate this information and your willingness to educate us about magnolias. So as I said, I'm going to disappear. I'll be back at the end of the presentation. Please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about why you got interested in hydrangeas, one of my very favorite shrubs, but how did you get into this? So thanks again. I'll see you in just a bit.
Great. Good afternoon. I guess it's afternoon. My name is Andrew Bunting. As Cindy said, I'm at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. I thought before we get going that I would share with you just a little bit about PHS and what I do at PHS. So PHS, many people know PHS for the Philadelphia Flower Show. But we also maintain many public gardens and public landscapes, especially throughout downtown Philadelphia, but also Meadowbrook Farm, which is a public garden north of the city in Jenkintown in Montgomery County. Here's just a little history of PHS. We're the oldest horticultural society in the United States. We're almost 200 years old. We'll be 200 in 2027. And we support horticulture. We really want to promote gardening to any type of gardener, whether they're the very beginning gardener to the extreme savvy and experienced gardeners. So we really meet gardeners wherever they are in their journey. So with our new vision statement, Vision 2027, we have 4 impact priorities. So we really work on creating healthy living environments, whether they're in the city or the suburbs. Food security and access to fresh food is a big part of PHS. Building meaningful social connections, whatever those might be, whether it's gardening together or sharing information. And then also really impacting economic development, whether it's through, we have a program called Roots to Reentry, where we train people who are coming out of the prison system and get them trained up in a variety of horticultural skills and then help them find jobs in the green industries, or whether it's creating and helping kind of entrepreneurial pursuits, whether it's a new kind of budding landscaping company or gardening company or whatever the case might be. So those are our 4 priorities. The flower show normally is indoors. It's actually been indoors every year since 29. But with COVID-19, we are forced to go outdoors. And so you can see here, June 5th through the 13th, it'll be at FDR Park, which is a park in South Philly near the stadium. So we're really excited about that. Hopefully, if you're interested, please go online, phsonline.org, and you can find out all information about the flower show and PHS. So let's talk magnolias. So Magnolias has been a passion of mine for some time. I, in fact, wrote a book on it a few years ago for Timber Press. And for years, I worked at the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College, which is where I live in Swarthmore. It's in southeastern Pennsylvania. We had a very extensive magnolia collection. So that's where my interest probably really took off. And we developed a large collection. And then subsequent to that, I left and went to Chicago Botanic Garden, then Atlanta Botanical Garden, and then back to Pennsylvania. And all those entities, I was involved in growing magnolias. And it was and I am today heavily involved with the Magnolia Society. So if you want to know more about magnolias, that's a great source. It's the Magnolia Society is kind of equal parts home gardeners, professionals, and scientists, and that's magnoliasociety.org. So today is kind of, maybe 40 or so of my favorite magnolias that I know will do well in the mid-Atlantic. I live in the mid-Atlantic. Washington, D.C. would be considered kind of the southern mid-Atlantic, and I'll cover a wide range of magnolias. And also some ones that, if you are maybe the more southern mid-Atlantic, or, maybe you're living in North Carolina or maybe a little farther south, or you have a garden with some protection, some more kind of unusual evergreen magnolias that you might want to consider. So the genus Magnolia is found in native habitats throughout the world, the lion's share of them being in Asia, especially Southeastern Asia. So there's magnolias in Japan and China, lots in Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and even as far south as Papua New Guinea. There aren't any that are native to Europe, and there are none that are native to Africa, none that are native to Australia or New Zealand, although those are both good climates for growing magnolias. In the United States, there's 7 native species, and I'll start with those. And then in Cuba, there's 6 endemic magnolias. In Mexico, there's about 3 dozen. And then as you go through the Caribbean, Central America, there are magnolias. And then when you get into Northern South America and Colombia, there's almost 40 endemic magnolias. When I say endemic, that means they're only found in Colombia. And then magnolias continue into northern parts of South America and then kind of stop there. So most of the magnolias we're familiar with are deciduous. They lose their leaves, but most of the magnolias worldwide, and there's about 400 species, are mostly evergreen trees. So for example, in Colombia, in South America, all 40 species are large timber species, some over 100 feet tall, and they're all evergreen. So today, I'm going to start with some of our North American native species. So the one I'll start with first is Magnolia Macrophylla, which has a range kind of Ohio to Kentucky, south to Georgia, and west to Arkansas, in Louisiana. A lot of these native magnolias have very large leaves, and this one does have large leaves up to 18 inches long. It has a large white flower that's very fragrant. The blooms in this area in May, has a kind of a purple splotch in the center of the flower. They're born kind of sporadically, has kind of interesting fruits. So the fruit of a magnolia is called a follicle, and this will turn kind of a pinkish red. Another one that's similar to Magnolia Macrophylla. So Macrophylla in the wild will get 30 to 50 feet tall, and probably in cultivation, maybe not quite that height, but probably 40 feet tall by 40 feet wide. So if you don't have the room for that, you might consider this one. This is Magnolia Macrophylla subspecies ashii. So in every kind of way, shape, and form, it's just a diminutive version of Magnolia Macrophylla, which is called the big leaf magnolia. This is called Ash's magnolia. This is found in its native range in about 5 or 6 counties in the northern panhandle of Florida. And you might be thinking, well, how is a plant that's native to northern Florida going to grow in northern regions, but it's proven to be hardy all the way up into Chicago and perfectly hardy all throughout the eastern seaboard. And you can see it's smaller in stature, maybe 15 feet tall, 15 feet wide, still big leaves, still big flowers. There's a close-up of the flowers, also very fragrant. You can see here, very big flowers. So if you're looking for kind of a tree or shrub that will bring kind of a tropical effect to the garden, you might consider either this Macrophylla ashii, and then I'm going to show you a couple more that you might consider as well. Undersides of the leaves are kind of silvery. Fall color on these magnolias and most magnolias is kind of a golden yellow, so decent fall color. Most magnolias will grow best in full sun. They want soils with good drainage. They don't really particularly survive drought very well. And most of them need kind of well-draining soils. I will show you a native that can actually take wet or standing water, but for the most part, I would just plant them in soils that drain well. Another favorite, maybe not as big of leaves as Macrophylla or Macrophylla ashii, is the Fraser Magnolia. And this is found all through the southern Appalachian Mountains as an understory magnolia. So in its native habitat, grows in almost full shade, but actually performs better as a specimen tree in full sun. It has flowers that are kind of similar in size, maybe not as big as Macrophylla, and then it has these kind of broad pyramidal leaves. There's a subspecies of this called variety or subspecies pyramidata that's found throughout the southern coastal plain. So that's another one that I don't have featured here, but you could consider as well. So there, the leaves are kind of interesting. They're kind of like a micro version of Macrophylla. They have, like Macrophylla, what's called an auriculate base to the leaf, where there's kind of two lobes, or kind of two kind of earlobe-like appendages. That's kind of a good way to identify it. So you can see this also has kind of a tropical look to it. And then another that has really big leaves, and the leaves on this one, this is called the umbrella magnolia, Magnolia Tripeta. The leaves can be up to 24 inches long. It's found from kind of southern Pennsylvania down to Georgia, and then west to Arkansas. It also has very big flowers, but the way the flowers differ between this and Macrophylla is the flowers have an unpleasant smell, or they're kind of described as being fetid. So you might not want to plant this maybe next to your front door. But again, if you're looking for a big, bold foliage magnolia for the landscape, Tripeta, it can be very, very good. They get very large. They can get, up to 50, 60, 70 feet tall. I've seen some really great specimens. You often see these on old estates. So it is a tree that's been in cultivation for quite some time. And then you'll see it, there's quite a few modern day hybrids that have Tripeta as one of the parents. So there's a lot of people playing around with Magnolia hybridization, and one of the species they've been using is Tripeta to try to bring some bigger flowers to other clones or cultivars or hybrids. And a close-up of the flower kind of as it's splayed open. So with all of these, with Magnolia Macrophylla, ashii, fraseri, and Tripeta, the flowers are born sporadically throughout the plant, and after the plant has its leaves. A lot of magnolias bloom before the leaves come out. So none of these are ones that you would grow specifically for the flowers, but all of them have these kind of exceptionally large tropical leaves, and that would probably be the main reason you would grow these. And that they're native. So if you're looking for a native plant for your yard, these all kind of fit the bill. One of my favorite magnolias is the Sweet Bay Magnolia, Magnolia Virginiana. And Magnolia Virginiana either comes with the variety Virginiana, so Virginiana variety Virginiana, or most of the cultivars are Virginiana variety australis. In its native habitat, it starts in Massachusetts. It's a coastal plain species, goes south, Long Island, Pine Barrens in New Jersey, all the way along all the southern states, all the way into central Florida, skips southern Florida and ends up in Cuba again. And then it's kind of sporadically found as you go west, again, more kind of coastal areas, but you'll find it inland as well. So the variety australis part of the species are those that tend to be evergreen in nature. They tend to be more of a single trunk tree. If it's a variety Virginiana, they tend to be multiple stemmed and deciduous. So most of the selections have been made for finding ones that are more evergreen. So this one, Henry Hicks, which was selected, originally came from a nursery on Long Island, actually was selected at the Scott Arboretum of Swarthmore College, is a great single stem specimen. In a good winter, meaning not too cold, it can be fully evergreen. In winters where it's on the cold side, it'll just become more deciduous. The flowers start to come out kind of late April, early May. They're single, white, intensely fragrant with kind of a lemony fragrance. Kind of again, sporadically born throughout the canopy of the tree. So there's several that are tree-like. So there's one, Henry Hicks, Satellite is a good one, Santa Rosa, Cully, Green Shadow, Green Bay. There's probably a couple dozen cultivars of these kind of varying types of evergreen Sweet Bay magnolias. And also, because they're a coastal plain species, they actually grow in wet areas. So in the Pine Barrens, which are near here in New Jersey, you often find them growing in swampy areas on the edge of a pond, really poorly drained areas. So it is one of the few trees that grows in real swampy, wet conditions. So if you have a part of your garden or yard that just doesn't drain for whatever reason, maybe you might consider planting this. Another one, not a great picture, but there's a new one out called Sweet Thing. Also goes under the cultivar name Perry Page. And this is actually more kind of shrub-like. So I've started to see this in some production wholesale nurseries. So in theory, it's finding its way out to retail outlets. And it's really more of a shrub-like Sweet Bay Magnolia. So this could be grown as a substitute for any of your shrubbery broadleaf evergreens like rhododendrons or cherry laurels or boxwood, or wherever you might need kind of a rounded evergreen in the landscape. There is a variegated one. This either goes under the name Mattie Mae Smith or Mardi Gras. If you have either of those, they're synonyms. And I've seen this grow in a fair amount of shade, and it's really a great plant to kind of lighten a dark shady corner in your yard. And then, probably the quintessential evergreen magnolia that, especially those of you that are, say, in Washington, D.C. and South would be completely familiar with, is what's called the Southern Magnolia. And this is there probably is no tree that's more ubiquitous and more kind of iconic as a Southern tree than the Southern Magnolia. It's it becomes pretty common in Washington, D.C., where there's some really nice specimens that are 3, 4, 5, 6 stories tall. In the wild, it can get 100 feet tall. I've seen it growing as a major forest tree in northern Florida or in parts of Alabama. It's grown for its large, broad, shiny evergreen leaves. A lot of the cultivars like this one, which is D.D. Blanchard, has kind of a brown fuzz on the underside of the leaves, which is called an endomentum. And then starting kind of late spring, summer, depending on where you are in the country, you get these very large white flowers that have a lemony fragrance, not unlike the sweet bay magnolia, Magnolia Virginiana. The way that these two trees differ from a cultivation point of view is this really needs dry, well-drained soil, while the sweet bay can take the wet soils. There's many, many, many cultivars, especially if you live, say, DC South, you can grow them all. When you come north, we can actually grow in Pennsylvania, you know, a decent range of the Southern Magnolias, but not all the cultivars are as hardy as others. So one that's really popular in the South, which is a diminutive version of this, is called Little Gem. And Little Gem, you know, historically has not done well here, but you know, in my COVID pastime, I just drive around neighborhoods looking at plants. And I've seen a bunch of Little Gems that actually now are doing well. So with global climate change and warmer winters, some of the less hardy Magnolia grandiflora are actually doing better in this area. But this is one of my favorite. This is D.D. Blanchard. This has a gold medal designation, which is a program through the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society that promotes great plants for the Mid-Atlantic region. If you want to learn more about that program, go to our website, and we have a complete database of the 150 plants that have gotten gold medal designation over the last 40 years or so. Large white flowers, here they are kind of in bud, but then they open out or splay open. You can see this incredible kind of rusty brown, kind of cinnamon brown, kind of felty underside of the leaves. And there's others. D.D. Blanchard's a great one. Bracken's Brown Beauty, that's one that's probably the most ubiquitous of this type in the South. One of my favorites is another kind of diminutive form. So like Little Gem, this is one called K. Paris. So this is thought to be a hybrid between, I believe, Bracken's Brown Beauty and Little Gem that was found maybe 15 years ago, and it's smaller in stature. So, you know, while, you know, the normal Magnolia grandiflora can get 40, 50, 60, 70 feet tall, this one stays in the range of, say, 20 feet tall and maybe 10 feet wide at the base, kind of a small pyramid. Has beautiful brown undersides of the leaves. And these really make great cut branches for winter displays, whether it's a wreath on your front door or just a winter bouquet in your house. If you want another great little version, Teddy Bear. This is actually a hedge that was just planted at Stoneleigh Garden, which is a public garden near Chanticleer, which features native plants in our area. And this has more of a rounded leaf than, say, Little Gem or K. Paris. This is at the Bartlett Arboretum. So this is the Arboretum that's part of Bartlett Tree Care Company. And it has, you can see a bit more of a rounded habit than, say, K. Paris, which is a bit more pyramidal. This is Greg Page, who is the curator at the Bartlett Arboretum. And this is in Charlotte, North Carolina. Close up of the leaves of Teddy Bear. So moving on to some of the deciduous ones. So for decades, one of the holy grails of the magnolia world was to find a yellow magnolia. And the Brooklyn Botanic Garden breeding program discovered or bred Elizabeth in the 70s. So Elizabeth was the first of the yellows, real pale, sulfur yellow, blooms late, so it never runs the risk of getting frosted. Slightly fragrant flowers, kind of big in stature over time, you know, 40 feet tall with an equal spread. It's one of the earlier of the yellows to bloom. So it blooms as the leaves are coming out. A lot of yellows actually bloom once the leaves have come out. And then the fall color, which is decent. The parents of all the yellows are Denudata, which I'll show you in a moment, and Acuminata, which is a cucumber tree magnolia, which is another native that I did not show you, but that tree gets 100 feet tall. So in theory, the stature on the yellows could get quite large over time. One that I really like that's a bit more stout in its habit is Lois. Has more of a tulip-shaped or chalice-shaped flower and a little deeper yellow than Elizabeth, but came out of the same breeding program from Brooklyn Botanic Garden. The earliest of the yellows to flower is one called Butterflies. And this was a hybrid created by Phil Savage in Michigan. So it also has really good hardiness. But you can see here, this tree is probably only 15 feet or 15 years old, but already has, pretty good stature. So it has hybrid vigor, which makes it grow faster. And then they can get fairly large over time. So the flower shape is a little bit different on these, a bit more tepal. So with magnolias, the showy part of the flower is actually called a tepal, which is a modified petal. And, very, very floriferous as well with butterflies. Another that I like for the name, Judy Zook, when I came to the Scott Arboretum in the late 80s, was the director. She then subsequently went on to Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and they named this magnolia in her honor when she retired from Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And for a long time, it went under a number called BBGRC 1164. So if you have that, you have this. It's much more upright and fastigiate in habit. It's actually a complex hybrid of Acuminata, Denudata, and then it has Stellata rosea. And then you can see kind of that pink suffusion at the base of the tepal. And actually tepals are more kind of orangey in color than they are yellow. And it also has a real fruity fragrance versus kind of that lemony fragrance with Magnolia Virginiana and Magnolia grandiflora. It also blooms pretty late as well. And then you want to look at this and think this is a yellow magnolia, but actually one of the parents is Acuminata. It's thought to be a chance seedling between Acuminata and Springeri diva. It's one called Coral Lake. And because it has Acuminata as a parent, it blooms later than most of the pinks. So the pinks that most everybody knows that bloom the earliest are the saucer magnolias, but they bloom so early, they often run the risk of kind of late spring frost. But this one blooms quite a bit later, blooms more the time of the yellow magnolias and doesn't really run the risk of getting frosted. And so if you look at the base of the tepal, you can see just a slight amount of yellow, and that's from the Acuminata parent. This is Magnolia Springeri Elongata. I mentioned Springeri diva, which is another beautifully elegant tree, but Elongata is a native of China. It really is a spectacular tree, kind of not super early, but kind of mid-season for magnolias. Beautiful tree, fragrant flowers, incredible profusion of kind of really soft pinkish white tepal. So if you can find it, it's a great tree to have for the landscape. This is one called Star Wars. So one of the parents of Star Wars is Cambellia, and Cambellia is another kind of holy grail of the magnolia world in that it's one of the biggest flowering of all the magnolias. But the problem with Cambellia is it grows in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, and the only places in the United States where it really does well are places like San Francisco and Seattle, where it really has kind of cool summers. Also does really well in southwestern parts of England. But if you kind of want something that's close to Cambellia, you might consider Star Wars because it's kind of the closest you'll get as far as kind of these big, blousy, flowering magnolias for this area. In the distance is one of the star magnolias. This is Magnolia Stellata. Centennial was named by the Arnold Arboretum in 1964 to celebrate their centennial or 100th year anniversary. It's also a gold medal plant. It's really one of the most floriferous of all the star magnolias. It tends to be more of ultimately a small flowering tree reaching about 18 to 20 feet tall. Here it is, a mature specimen at the Scott Arboretum. There are other stellatas that are more shrub-like. Here's one called Chrysanthemum flora, which is a kind of a multi-tepaled, 40 to 50 tepals per flower, kind of a soft pink, kind of bubblegum pink, but more shrubby. But stellatas, like the saucer magnolias, bloom really early, so they are another magnolia that often runs the risk of getting frosted. But if they get frosted, that's just superficial damage that doesn't really impact the health of the plant. It'll turn all your flowers brown or black, but they'll soon leaf out after that and be perfectly fine. Another really popular magnolia, this is probably one of the most popular magnolias in the entire United States, is Magnolia Liebneri Leonard Messel. If you go to any garden center, they're bound to probably have Leonard Messel as one of their core magnolias that they sell. It's a hybrid between Stellata and then Cobus, which is kind of a tree version of Stellata. So it's kind of early flowering as magnolias go, but incredibly profuse. Like every year it looks like this. And that's a great thing about magnolias is one, they bloom when they're young and they always put on a great show. There's never an off year. And there's some magnolias like this, saucer magnolias, star magnolias, that always have incredible profusion of flowers. I mean, I'm biased to magnolias, but it's for a reason, because there is no flowering tree that is better. I mean, I love flowering cherries, but if you're really looking for flower power, magnolias are unbeatable. And, magnolias are pretty tough as trees go as well. So, they really don't have too many shortcomings. There is an insect called Magnolia scale that some magnolias get, but as a genus or a species, they're relatively resistant to most pest and disease problems. I mentioned the parents of the yellows. So Acuminata is one. The other is Denudata, which is a Chinese species, which blooms very early, actually the earliest in this area. Sometimes, like almost now, if it's been a mild winter. So this is called the Uland Magnolia, white, fragrant, pure white flowers, beautiful tree, upright habit. Here's a selection we made at Swarthmore. We got a seedling from J.C. Ralston in the late 80s. Over the years, it seemed to have more of an upright habit, so we named it Swarthmore Sentinel. So much more upright than, say, the straight species. And this again can bloom really early. This can be a heartbreak magnolia, and then it comes out looking beautiful, and then it gets down to 28 degrees, and all the flowers turn to brown at night. Fragrant as well. So if you have yellow magnolias that have fragrance, probably the fragrance is actually coming through from the Denudata parent. I put this in my top 10. This is Wada's memory, Magnolia cuensis. Blooms not as early as the saucer and star, but shortly thereafter. Upright and oval in its infancy, can be profuse flowering tree as a young specimen. It will kind of broaden over time. There's a fantastic specimen at Winterthur in Delaware that's probably 50 feet wide. Magnolias are also relatively fast growing as a genus. So this tree is probably only 10 years old. This is at Scott Arboretum. Another one at Scott Arboretum. You can see I kind of upright and oval. The parents are Cobus, which is the tree version of the star magnolia, and then another magnolia called the Anise Magnolia, Magnolia salicifolia. There's a nice young specimen, probably 4 years old, but in full flower. and a close-up of Wada's memory. So for those of you who are from or working in DC or from DC, there was a whole series that came out of the U.S. National Arboretum in 1962 called The Girls. Sometimes they're referred to as the Little Girls. They were hybridized by Frank DeVos and William Kozar, who were hybridizers at the National Arboretum. They took Magnolia Stellata rosea, which is a kind of a shrubby pink magnolia, and crossed it with another shrubby, kind of darker pink magnolia called Magnolia Lavafolia nigra, and came up with seven girl names. So I won't remember them all, but this one is Anne. So there's Anne, Betty, Pinky, Judy, Ricky, Jane, Susan. I think that's all of them. Maybe there's one more. If anybody knows I missed one, you can put that in the chat. But the idea is that they bloom a little later. So they're after kind of when the earliest magnolias tend to get frost in. They tend to be shrub-like for most of their life. The ones like this one were from that original distribution, 1962. So at maturity, they're kind of like 18 feet by 18 feet, like more of a small tree or a large shrub. But for most of their years, they're kind of more diminutive in the landscape. So if you're someone that maybe just has a small courtyard or a city garden, you might consider one of the girls. Anne is the most popular, which is this one. They're all kind of variations of pink and purple. Here's this is Betty, which is kind of lighter pink color than Anne. And this is one of those mature ones. So this one is almost 60 years old, 59 years old. That's Betty. Also from the National Arboretum, 1963, this was actually bred by William Kozar. Came two sister seedlings. One is Spectrum and the other is Galaxy. And these kind of have similar attributes to the girls, but they're more they are trees. And I've seen Galaxy grown as a great kind of medium-sized street tree at Ohio State University. Kind of mid-season, so not so early that they run the risk of getting frosted. And I would say relatively available. Like Galaxy it's not unusual to see that in a garden center. So I want to jump over to a few more evergreens. So, some of these are what I would say are zone 8, but, in Swarthmore, we, for a long time, we're kind of 6B, now we're 7, 7A. I've never seen this growing in Swarthmore, but I think as you get into, say, DC and South, a lot of these are worth trying if you don't have them already. I think they still would need protection. As you get into more, say, true zone 8, say, Southern Virginia, North Carolina, definitely, if anybody's on the call from Georgia, say anywhere in the true Southeast, these are all worth trying if you can find them. This is Magnolia Fovealata, one called Shibamichi. Shibamichi is a famous plantsman in Japan. I've met him a couple times. He has like a serious plantsman's nursery, great at selecting plants. This is one of his selections. I've seen Fovealata, you can see in China. I've seen it in the northern mountains of Vietnam near Sapa, which where a lot of the more cold hardy Vietnamese plants are coming from. But the indumentum on this is somewhere between kind of brown and golden. So from a hybridizing point of view, people are looking at this and seeing if they can perhaps hybridize it with grandiflora and bring some kind of different indumentum colors to the undersides of the leaves of grandiflora. Flowers are really interesting as well. And this tree would be the one we saw in the wild in Vietnam, was probably 30 feet tall, kind of loosely pyramidal in its habit. And the flowers too, I think if you can hybridize this flower into some of our more traditional magnolia flowers, you can really come up with some interesting hybrids. And if you are interested in magnolias and join the Magnolia Society, which I think is $30, you'll get access to the journal, which comes out twice a year, newsletter four times a year, and then access to just that community. And there's hybridizing magnolias is actually relatively easy. There's a lot of hobbyists that are doing it, and there's some like what we all think of magnolias today. If I give this lecture 20 years from now, what we'll see in the magnolia world will be significantly different than what we know magnolias to be today. This is another kind of holy grail. There's some insignis that are actually red or close to red, and that's the new holy grail in the magnolia world, is to find a true red magnolia. So this is a plant that I thought was not hardy in Swarthmore. I went to a garden nearby this summer and I saw both Magnolia insignis, actually decent sized trees, and another one I'll show you in a second, Magnolia Uninstance, perfectly hardy. So I would say this is insignis and Uninstance are probably more zone 7, so New Jersey, Delaware, at least southeastern Pennsylvania, and definitely anywhere south. This is named for Anita Figler, who her husband Dick Figler is, probably the most renowned magnoliophile on the planet. I mean, I guess technically he's a hobbyist because he professionally didn't do magnolias, but he's, probably the most knowledgeable magnolia person on the planet. And this is named in honor of his wife, Anita, who's also active in the Magnolia Society. So another just, good evergreen, strap-shaped foliage. So if you're looking for an upright evergreen tree, if something maybe a little different than Magnolia Virginiana. And then this is a really exciting hybrid. This is a hybrid between the Southern Magnolia, Magnolia grandiflora, and Magnolia Seboldii. So if you know Seboldii, it has kind of this boss of purple stamens. So there's lots of people playing around with grandiflora. Again, kind of create a more floriferous flower, more upward facing, but also hardier. So like Magnolia grandiflora, you cannot grow in Chicago, but in the upper Midwest, this is kind of a breakthrough plant where, if you want to start trying a evergreen magnolia, this would be the one to grow, because Seboldii, anything with Seboldii in it brings in tremendous hardiness because it's such a hardy species. Magnolia Lavafolia, Michelle, very floriferous, late winter flowering. I think this is a plant that, at least in the DC area, people should be playing around with. Also, like a really great kind of late winter fragrance. This is one growing at Plant Delights Nursery outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. Magnolia Maudier, a little less hardy than Magnolia Lavafolia. Again, kind of North Carolina South. This is at Dick Figler's personal arboretum. He lives near Clemson. If you're ever out that way, I'm sure he would love to have visitors. It gets very hot there. So this has great heat tolerance as well. And then this is Magnolia Uninstance. This is one I saw in Swarthmore, or nearby Swarthmore this summer. So it should be hardy, at least zone, 7A. Great and really narrow leaves. I like the evergreen texture of this magnolia. And then the flowers are really interesting too. They kind of look like Magnolia Virginiana flowers, and actually the leaves don't look that dissimilar to Magnolia Virginiana, but like Cicadas, they kind of have those purple stamens. And then I'm going to finish with really what I consider, if you could only have one magnolia, and if I would pick the saucer magnolia. I think inch for inch, ounce for ounce, there's probably no better flowering tree, in the United States than the saucer magnolia. It's the oldest of all the magnolia hybrids. It was hybridized in France in the 1800s. The parents are Denudata, which brings in kind of early flowering and the profusion of flowers, white flowers and fragrance, with Liliflora, which brings in kind of the purple or pink flowers. In Swarthmore, typically they would bloom like 1st of April, but we've had them bloom as early as mid-March. So you can imagine, if the nights get cold, they can run the risk of getting frosted. That if you go around Swarthmore, which is kind of an older community, in the spring, a lot of the older homes have saucer magnolias. There are some older cultivars. This is kind of a whitish one with a flush of pink at the base called amabilis. You can see it's blooming. That blue underneath is Scilla siberica, the Siberian squill, and Chianodoxa luciliae. Whatever the common name of that is, snow and it's not summer, can't remember the name. Magnolia Norbertii is an old French cultivar. There are some smaller ones. There's one called Lilliputian that only gets about 10 feet tall, and maybe a spread of 6 to 8 feet. Good profusion of kind of lilac purple flowers. And I'll finish with that image so that we have some time for some questions. This is at one of the dormitories at Swarthmore College, but you can see this is like typical spring. You can hardly even see the branches. There's so many flowers. And then when the tepals fall all over the ground, that makes for a beautiful display as well. I'd say most of the saucer magnolias are fragrant. Not all of them have intense fragrance, but most of them have some fragrance. And if you want to find out more about PHS, there's my email, and then there's our web address as well. And we all encourage you to come up for the Philadelphia Flower Show in early June of this year. But we also, like the Smithsonian, have a lot of especially now web-based programming. And then when things start to return to normal, we'll have lots of in-person programming. We encourage you to also come up and explore our public gardens and public landscapes as well in and around Philadelphia. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Andrew, thank you so much. That was just terrific. Spring is on the way, and I'm so glad for it. We heard from several people that said they're blooming in our state right now. So I said, how lucky you are. But I also have to apologize. At the very beginning, you probably thought you landed on the wrong planet or the wrong webinar. I was saying hydrangeas instead of magnolias.
I know, that's okay.
So but you are on par. Sometimes the brain just doesn't connect with the mouth. So thank you.
Well, then I worried. I was like, oh, am I supposed to be given a hydrangea lecture?
No, that was me. One of the #1 questions: where can we see? Where's the best collection in the United States that we can see many of these magnolias? And I have to put a pitch for one of our online resources right now. We did do a story map of the magnolias around the Smithsonian, so that someplace, if you go to our website, you could see that. But where do you, I think I know, because I visited there.
So I would say, let's just start with DC to begin with. So, I would definitely have to pitch the gardens, the Smithsonian gardens, because I've seen images posted. I've seen a lot from James Gagliardi and others. So I know That's a good local place. Of course, the U.S. National Arboretum, because many of the hybrids came from uh, the National Arboretum. And then kind of going out from there, Brookside Gardens in Maryland, kind of moving north in this area. Scott Arboretum is probably the best collection, but Morris Arboretum, part of University of Pennsylvania, also has a great collection. Of course, Longwood would have a good collection. The best collection probably in the world is at the Bartlett Arboretum in Charlotte. But that is, just so people know, it's kind of quasi private public. It's not just open to the public, but I think by appointment you can get in there. So it's the Arboretum that supports the laboratory that's part of the Bartlett Tree Care Company. Other ones, if you're traveling abroad, Wisley, Royal Horticultural Society, Wisley, Carhays Castle in southwestern England. Probably second to the Bartlett Arboretum is Arboretum Westphalar, which is in Belgium. But there's others in the United States, in colder parts of the US, like the Dawes Arboretum in Ohio, Chicago Botanic Garden, Morton Arboretum, both in the Chicagoland area. Actually, the Green Bay Botanic Garden, if you're looking for a garden that really has great cold hardiness collection, that's one. There was a hybridizer called Dennis Ledvina, who really hybridized for hardiness, and his collection is represented at the Green Bay Botanic Garden. And then if you go out west, I would say Huntington, Southern California, San Francisco Botanic Garden, Berkeley Botanic Garden, kind of in the Bay Area, Quarry Hill Botanic Garden in wine country, Washington Park Arboretum in Seattle, Heronswood out on Bainbridge Island. And actually the president of the Magnolia Society International, Todd West, is at North Dakota State University. So if you want to find out about, real cold hardiness, talk to him, because we had our national international meeting. It was a webinar, and the high for the day, he's in Fargo, is going to be -17. So.
Oh, geez. That's a little bit, but there you go. You have all your trips planned for you for the next 2 years once we start traveling again. So, and I was going to say Swarthmore because that's one of the most beautiful collections I've seen, and you can walk around the campus and see all kinds of lovely things. So thank you for that. And this one, I know a good answer, because they were asking, well, what about how tall does this one grow? How short is this one? How well does this one? I would highly recommend your book. So if you give us the name of your book, and we'll
I can.
Oh, show it. Excellent. Excellent.
You see that?
Great. Yep, I can see it. The Plant Lover's Guide to Magnolias. And I know my local library has it. So I would suggest looking for that for all the questions that you have about individual species, because there's certainly a lot that you talked about, and you can get great information from that book as well. And people are thanking you for the presentation, but we are worried about cicadas coming in this year. Are magnolias tasty to cicadas? Are they tasty to deer? Are there some that are tastier than others?
I would say I wouldn't worry about the cicadas. I mean, they may cause a little bit of damage. Deer, the big problem with deer is not so much them eating them, it's them rubbing them. When their new antlers are emerging, they look for kind of pliable trees. And a young magnolia can just get shredded, especially Magnolia Virginiana. I've seen totally hammered by deer. I mean, they'll browse on them a little bit, but magnolias have some fragrance in a lot of the stems. And they tend to stay clear of those. But other than that, I mentioned the Magnolia scale, and also in the South, oleander scale is something you can see on magnolias, as long as culturally, they get the right soil conditions and the right drainage, and you give them supplemental water during the summer so they don't suffer the effects of drought. They're really actually a pretty tough tree. Another thing you need to be mindful is most magnolias are grafted. So they will send up what's called understock, which is this real vigorous undergrowth. So you just need to be mindful to prune that out. Same would be true with like a witch hazel or other grafted plants.
That was one of the questions. Are there any special techniques for pruning, or
I would
again, does
say
it vary?
don't prune. Like
Okay.
everybody wants to prune. They feel like
Uh-huh.
they need to prune their shrubs and trees. And my approach to prune is prune if you need to. There's a broken branch or a crossing branch, or you want to limit up, but you shouldn't be pruning almost anything for the sake of pruning. So just let them go. They do. A lot of older magnolias produce these kind of epicormic or water sprouts. So these kind of the sprouting on the interior branches, and you can clean that out. That's more of an aesthetic decision than a health of the tree type choice.
So dead, dying, and diseased.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
I live by too. Um, Also, is there a siting that's important for magnolias? So do you plant them on the east side of the
Yeah, I
house?
would say, most magnolias can just be planted, out in the landscape. I'd say if you're in an area where, say, the Southern Magnolia or, some of these evergreen magnolias, seem like on the edge of hardiness, then you would want to give them some protection, maybe a courtyard or next to the side of your house, just some area that's not as exposed, maybe the east or west side of your house. Maybe not the southern side because they might heat up too early. They can also get frost cracks, which are caused by, if they're like on the south side of the house and kind of the, water starts moving in the trunks, and then the trunks get really cold at night, and then they kind of bust open. So you don't want it to be, you want it to be protected, but not in a situation where it is tricked into thinking it's warmer than it actually is.
So is there one magnolia that's better than the other to grow in a container? I know you showed some dwarfs. Was that what you would suggest? Keep the
Yeah, I mean,
smaller ones?
containers, with growing any woody plants in containers, you really need to be in a part of the country that doesn't get that cold, because you figure the whole root mass is exposed. So like up here, I probably would shy away from growing it unless it's a conifer, growing it, any deciduous plant. I mean, maybe some Japanese maples would do okay. But yeah, I would go with one of the smaller ones if you're in a part of the country where you could get away with that. So, like that Lilliputian, Chrysanthemum flora. There's a couple others I didn't mention, Black Tulip and Genie, which are more kind of smaller in size or stature. Like Genie only gets 12 feet tall. That might be a good subject.
Yeah, I agree. We always say plant 2 zones colder than you. So
Yeah.
that way they're less likely to succumb to our varying winter temperatures. This year alone, we've had them all
Yeah.
over the place. Um, we're going to have to invite you back, because there was a question about what are we going to look at for magnolias in 20 years. So that intrigued me as well. So think about putting together a lecture for
Yeah.
that. If
And
you could say something in a minute.
yeah, I would say, the trends are to find a truly red magnolia, to create these beautiful clones that you tend to see in our area or in the south and the north. So bringing cold hardiness to selections in more northern areas. More evergreens. You'll start to see more and more and more as these other evergreens from around the world come into cultivation. I mean, some of the ones I saw in Colombia, if you could replicate those, they're just not found in cultivation in the United States. But there's one called Magnolia hernandezii that has these massive leaves, shiny, but they're kind of corrugated, like the texture is unbelievable. Like if you could get that into a Magnolia grandiflora, that would be interesting.
That really would. Well, there's so many more questions. And like I said, we will bug you for answers for some of
Yeah,
them. But
sure.
I highly
Yeah.
recommend going out and getting your book so you can read more about the magnolias and be very learned. But I want to thank you for joining us today to speak on magnolias. Hydrangeas will be another topic later on.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
want
I
to
can do
thank
that
our,
too.
excellent, excellent. We'll come back. But thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you wanting to acquire more knowledge about plants and gardening, and hope that we see you again next week. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.